First things first, obviously, we gotta get the wheel off. And sometimes in the rust belt, you need to take a dead blow, something rubber, and persuade it off. Alright, so they made this nice and easy, guys. 14mm bolts up top here to get the caliper off of the bracket. And down below. And we'll get this caliper off and out of our way. Now the bracket bolts are 17mm. And we'll get those out. And the bottom one. Those two bolts out, and the bracket with the pads comes right off. Bring them over to a flat surface. Knock them out. Get this old hardware out of the way. And it's a good idea if there's a lot of corrosion to take this to a wire wheel if you have excess, or at the very least get a file on it and try to make those surfaces nice and clean and flat. After you have those pad surfaces nice and flat, pop the new hardware on, nice and easy. Throw a little bit of grease on there, caliper grease. No need to go too crazy, it's just so the pads can slide nice and easy. Get the pads mounted in there, and we're ready to go back on the vehicle. Now to get this rotor out, we got 2 Phillips screws. Way easier to get them out with an impact when they're corroded like this. If you use hand tools bringing them out, you run the risk of stripping them out. Make sure you put them back in with hand tools though, because they don't need to be that tight. As you can imagine, the rotor's on there pretty good too, so we're gonna have to give it a few taps. And break it free. Make sure when you got the new one, you got the holes lined up so that there's places for the screws to go. And if there's grease or oil on this, that's just for packaging reasons so it doesn't rust when they're shipping. You got to make sure you get some brake clean and a rag and wipe that all off. You don't want it on the new pad surface. And like I said, we're going to reinstall these screws with hand tools. Hand tight. It's not going anywhere. It doesn't need to be terribly tight. And then we'll get this bracket back on. So I already got one bolt in there, obviously holding it up. I like to put a little bit of orange Loctite on these bolts just as a little added security. It's not required or anything. It's just to make sure, be safe, cheap security. We'll get these bolts worked back in. Top one and the bottom one. Now the new brake hardware kit came with these that weren't on the original ones, but that's alright. Just put it inside the little hole on both pads. We'll get our caliper compressed. Should be able to go in nice and easy with this by hand. If it's any more force than that, then it's time to replace the caliper. Now that it's compressed, we'll get some grease in there, just a little bit of caliper grease. Grease attracts dirt, don't overdo it. Don't forget, as part of your brake maintenance, to pop these pins out and just put a little bit of grease on them. Nothing crazy, as you can see, just a light coat. Put it back in. And the bottom one. Same thing. They would have probably been fine, but we're not going to touch them for another couple years, so might as well put a little bit more grease on them. Just a light coat, and it's ready to go back. You do not want to put too much grease on those, because then when it comes time to compress, they won't be able to go in all the way if you just packed it with grease. And now we're ready to pop this back on. So part of this is you have to make, now on these little caliper bolts, same thing, just a tiny bit of orange Loctite. Cheap security, don't overdo it. Orange or blue, no red obviously. Same with the bottom one. Got to push the caliper down at the same time you put it in because of those springs that went between the pads. Tighten those up, and I'll put the torque fix in the corner. And the bottom one. And that's it. We'll get this wheel back on, and we're ready to roll. Obviously in a star pattern, and we're not tightening them with the impact. We're just running them in. And you tighten them after you put it on the ground now with a torque wrench. It's back in the corner.